Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me. Thank you for juggling your diaries around. And I normally have these at 10 o'clock. 9 o'clock is actually used to be the ideal time for me. And like I said, unfortunately, they added exercise. Once a day exercise can only happen between 6 and 9, walking the dogs, all that kind of stuff. So I had to shift that. And then today there was a bit of a diary clash. So I took the next available gap, and that is today at 12 o'clock. So thank you for juggling around. Thank you for being flexible, something we've spoken about for a while. And welcome to session 3 on judgment, on conscious living, and particular judgment. This is one of my favorite sessions amongst the 8 sessions that we're going to be doing. Judgment is an extremely important part because most of us, no one likes to be called judgmental. And we have a lot of resistance to being called judgmental. But when I press people and say, well, even if you're not judgmental about others, how judgmental are you about yourself? Oh, no, I'm very judgmental about themselves, they say. Super critical, especially the perfectionists amongst you. And so if we can admit to being judgmental on ourselves, we are almost certainly judgmental on other people. Hi, Anne. Thanks for joining. So the argument for judgment is that we cannot avoid judgment. It forms the basis of every single relationship we have. Hi, Ryan. Thanks for joining us. It forms the basis of every relationship, and that's our relationship with our thoughts, our relationship with our feelings, our relationship with our bodies, and then our relationship, of course, with other people's thoughts, other people's feelings, other people's bodies. I've been watching the Facebook posts, and I call it the two sides in the middle of this lockdown. Those that are happy being under lockdown and protecting themselves, and those that just want to get out of lockdown and get started and get some money coming into their coffers. And there's extreme amount of judgment going on at the moment. So today's session is around judgment, and we're going to look at how it impacts our lives, and how it's almost impossible to avoid judgment. So we've covered in one of the previous series as well how it's important to hold less tightly onto these views that we have. It's not wrong to have a judgment, so we shouldn't beat ourselves up about it, but be careful that we don't hold on too tightly, because this is going to create a lot of problems for us in our relationships and then our relationship with ourselves. So welcome to any new people that are watching, and just again a reminder that all the previous videos are in archive on my video section of my Facebook page. It's under Greg Smith, counseling psychologist and executive coach, because this video could be getting viewed at any one time if you've shared it. Again, if you are watching it, please say hi so I know you're there. I will try as much as I can to respond to any of your comments. If you liked something, say you liked it. And then, yes, please, by all means, share my videos. I'd be grateful if the message can get out there. All right, so let's move into this session. So the main objective in today's session is we spoke about conscious living, and in particular mindfulness as a part of conscious living. And mindfulness teaches open awareness. Now, what open awareness is this thing about to see something without having to judge every single thing we see. I'm sure many of you know that there are, and quite a few people in your lives that will always have a comment about something. And I posted a video a while ago about Chicken Little, who was quite, everyone used to go to Chicken Little because he always had something to say about something. So he always had an opinion. And now, when we teach this open awareness thing, open awareness is about not having judgment. So it's not evaluative, and it's not pre-shaped by previous experiences, etc. And the way of discussing, or the way of encountering, or the way of sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, cultivating this open awareness is, again, by being still, by checking in with ourselves so that we can see how evaluative our minds are, and how, like today, the wind's blowing fairly strongly, and straight away that's a judgment. But it all depends on how we relate, or what would be strong. But if I'd said today, oh, this terrible wind that's blowing outside, it's just so hard, it's blowing dust everywhere, that's extremely considered a negative judgment. Whereas there are many people that might love the wind, kiteboarders, sailors, these kind of people, windsurfers. So we need to be careful about how we cloud our stream of judgments with these different opinions. And of course, our judgments are more than often unconscious. Again, they become a habitual way of thinking. It's ingrained into us from probably a young age. We learned, and we saw our parents talking like this, and then we start talking like this. Then, of course, to understand that, and again, I'm just thinking about Facebook posts that I've seen posting out there. They are extremely subjective. People deem their thoughts to be objective, and they think they are right because they're so fused with their thinking that they believe that their thoughts are right, and they believe they're very objective and very wise. Hi, Ray. Thanks for joining us. I think you're in Oz or New Zealand somewhere at the moment. So welcome, glad you could join us. So we need to be very careful that what we think is fact in our minds is actually opinion. And then we're wasting our time, as I said, trying to argue opinion. And then, of course, mindfulness or being conscious helps to make the unconscious conscious. And I often say to people, when we start living consciously or when you start living more mindfully, those feelings that we've always pushed under are going to come more to the surface. But the interesting thing is the feelings and the thoughts that we've run away from for so long often end up becoming less. They diminish. The minute you start focusing on them, they diminish. Okay. Ray's just corrected me, New Zealand. Thanks, Ray. All right, so then some more things around this theoretical background of judgments. So judgments can arise in many different ways. And I posted something this morning on my Facebook page around this lockdown, and it's creating two groups of people. And we've got these two groups, and they both hold very, very strong opinions. And it could be like anything, like whether it's religion or politics or abortion. These are, COVID and lockdown has created these two strong, highly opinionated two groups, which arguably are literally hating each other and cannot understand the other person's viewpoint at all. So biases create, you always end up with an in-group and an out-group. And whichever is the more majority, they will be what I term the lynch mob, and they can end up being quite vociferous in their condemnation of the other side. Then we can also have temporal forces, which can be just time-based. So temporal means time. So time-based, so you could just today not be feeling well or feeling sad, and you say, I shouldn't feel this way. So the minute we judge an emotion as either good or bad, straight away we are also putting judgment on that. Then, of course, we have societal rules. Depending on your society, your culture, your religion, this will create a whole lot of rules. And again, also it'll be in-group and out-group. And then our judgments can come from, as I said, from the outside or the internal, and they certainly influence our reality, and we're going to be going into this more. And probably the most destructive part of judgment is this dichotomy of thought, or the dichotomy of thought is a fancy way of saying that it creates a duality. It creates a huge separation between the two sides of good and evil, let's say, happy and sad, but we'll talk about that further into the session. Then, I'm sure many of you have seen this, but I use this regularly in my talks. I love it. I think it explains duality very well. So I'm just going to quickly read through it. Today was the absolute worst day ever. And don't try and convince me that there's something good in every day, because when you take a closer look, this world's a pretty evil place. Even if some goodness does shine through once in a while, satisfaction and happiness don't last. And it's not true that it's all in the mind and heart, because true happiness can be obtained only if one's surroundings are good. And it's not true that good exists. I'm sure you can agree that the reality creates my attitude. It's all beyond my control, and you'll never in a million years hear me say that today was a good day. So I generally would ask, how does it make you feel? And it's an extremely pessimistic view of the world. It's extremely negative, and it's quite depressing. Now, because, and I've used a yin and the yang, a version of the yin and the yang. Hi Nadine, welcome from Warmer, from her home, where else she says. So if we look at this, like this yin and yang that I've chosen, we cannot have one without the other. So when we read this idea from the bottom up, it goes like this. Today was a good day. And say that you'll never hear me in a million years. Hear me say that. Sorry, it's the wrong way around. It's all beyond my control. My attitude creates the reality. I'm sure you can agree that it's not true that good exists, only if one's surroundings are good. True happiness can be obtained because it's all in the mind and heart. And it's not true that satisfaction and happiness don't last. Some goodness does shine through once in a while, even if the world's a pretty evil place. Because when you take a closer look, there's something good in every day. And don't try to convince me that today was the absolute worst day ever. So I've put this into the slide presentation because it explains the duality. It doesn't matter what you see, there's always good and there's always bad together in a situation. I want you, this exercise is tough, but I don't want you to think of an event that's too close or that you're still reeling from or that you've just gone through, but perhaps something that you went through a few years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, as long as you want to go back. But I just want you to think of something that was painful. It could have been someone passing away. It could have been the ending of a relationship, a retrenchment, leaving a company. But just to think of it briefly, okay? Then I want you to think about the most negative consequences of that event and how you felt at the time. And now, in retrospect, sitting where you are now, 5 years or so down the line, I want you to focus on any positive aspects that might have happened and how the event might have benefited you. Example, even if you can think of no events or no reasons why this might have benefited you, perhaps this event has steeled you or helped you to become a little bit more hardy or a little bit more resilient. And just to think about what you learned from that experience and how you've perhaps changed or grown as a person. An idea behind this exercise is to show you that nothing is 100% good or 100% bad. Everything has some or the other, but when we judge something, we completely ignore any of the complexity that is inherent in that event. But there's always good and bad. And I've worked with a number of clients that are going through tremendous upheavals in their lives. And it's wonderful to see them in 5 to 10 years' time after that initial distraught, traumatic event that they went through, and how they managed to bounce back and find joy again and vitality. So we've just touched on this, that nothing is only good or bad. Everything will contain both sides. And again, we ignore that complexity. So today we're going to be talking about these different areas of judgments. We're going to cover what are judgments, just so that you can be aware that despite you having resistance to being called judgmental, we are all judgmental, and it's hard to avoid that. We're going to talk about how does judgments color reality, how does it strengthen duality, how it limits our reality, and how it creates conflict for us. So firstly, what are judgments? So these are core processes, and they are very evaluative. Yesterday, I was also in a bit of a ding-dong battle. I try not to get into these ding-dong battles on Facebook, but and I said to someone, but you're labeling. As soon as you label someone, whether you're labeling them a conspiracy theorist, everyone's terrorist is a freedom fighter for someone else. A conspiracy theorist is a critical thinker for other people. So we label people, and it's very evaluative, and it's often unconscious and automatic. I don't even think we know we're doing it half the time. But it's also based on opposites: good, bad, beautiful, ugly, desirable, undesirable, pleasant, unpleasant. So some of the characteristics we've spoken already about the judgment, that they color reality. We're going to break these down: strengthening duality, limiting reality, and creating conflict. So let's talk first about how judgments color our reality. So judgments operate like a lens. It's very much like wearing sunglasses and having to look at the whole world in front of you through these lenses. Everything is going to be tinted by the color of that lens, and we're going to see the world through that lens of judgment. Okay, and the color of that lens is normally shaped by our belief system, like we said at the beginning, by our cultures, by our parents, by the society we grew up in. And this lens will influence everything that we experience. Everything that we see will be tinted. So this would be you looking with your beliefs and norms inside your head, looking at something through the lens of judgment, and then only perceiving the reality through that lens. So it'll be a very tainted view of it. So if you believe that high salary was important and this equated with success, and you saw someone that had a low salary but was spending a lot of quality time with their children, you would judge that person as a loser. He's staying at home and got no money, but he might be quite happy, and we wouldn't know that. If, on the other hand, you believe that family were important and success was measured on how much time you could spend with your family, and then you saw someone with a low salary but spending a lot of quality time with their kids, you would judge that person as a winner. So depending on your belief system, depending on the lens that you view something, reality will have a very different mirror back to you, how you see that person. If you believe that crying was a sign of weakness and a situation happened that would make you cry, you would judge yourself to be very weak because you had seen crying as weakness. Whereas, obviously, if you don't see it as a sign of weakness, I often say to people that many people are very scared of being emotional, and yet the world's greatest leaders or the world's greatest teachers have often been very emotional people, and that makes quite interesting. And if you are in touch with your emotions, and if you can have a good relationship with them, you would become quite powerful and not weak, not weak, which is what a lot of us think. So this phrase or quote is very, very famous, and it says that judgment often says more about the person who makes the judgment than about the person about whom the judgment is made. I repeat, a judgment often says more about the person who makes the judgment than about the person about whom the judgment is made. Because it's projection, we often project onto other people what we're unable to see within ourselves. This is a wonderful little exercise or experiment they did in 2010. They organized job interviews. They had 60 men that were interviewing and 60 women that were applying for jobs, but it was all just a setup. And then they manipulated this information. They told the male interviewer that the female applicant was attracted or not attracted to them. All right, so the guy sitting was about to do the job interview. The lady comes in, and he has been given information in his ear that the lady coming in either likes him or doesn't like him, and they look at what the response was. So the first response, they were certain this would happen. So if the interviewer believed that the woman felt attracted to them, he was more flirtatious. So he would have been leaning forward, more smiles, very happy, and much more flirtatious. What they didn't work out or realize, and this came out through the experiment, That was if the male was more flirting, if the interviewer was more flirtatious, the female applicant also became more flirtatious when he believed that she felt attracted to him. And she didn't have any information. She just went in there blind. So this was how it actually can shape reality. So behavior is always guided by the filter through which we look at our realities. And this is the part that I said is quite extremely important. This ties in with black and white thinking. And extremely judgmental people are often extremely black and white thinkers. And this is what happens with strengthening duality. So in duality, duality is obviously what it means is having two parts to it. So it's at the core of all judgment. And duality is about contrast. And opposites can only exist in relation to each other. All right? You cannot have good without bad. You cannot have black without white, etc. So I want you to imagine now if you were the only person on this planet in the whole universe, the only person on the planet in the whole universe. How would you describe yourself? There was no one else for you to measure yourself against, but you were the only person. Would you be clever? Would you be fat? Would you be thin? Would you be old? Would you be young? Would you be tall? Would you be short? I had a chuckle once. I was lecturing to a group of MBA students at the NMU Business School, and the one chap said to me, shouted from the back. There were about 100 people in the class, and he shouted from the back, "Oh no, I'm black. I'm black." So I said, "Oh, great." And I said, "How would you know that you're black?" So he said, "I'd look at my skin." So I said, "Well, that's fine, but how are you going to know that you're black if there's no white people to compare yourself to?" And then everyone burst out laughing. So nothing exists in isolation. White has to exist because of black. Here I'm teaching. I cannot be a teacher unless there is a pupil or a participant in a group. And a pupil cannot exist unless there's a teacher. So you have to have both parts there. So we have to need to understand that opposites only exist in relation to each other. So absolutely speaking, nothing is good or wrong. And opposites make each other possible. Happiness, sadness, life, death, work, holiday. They're both sides of the same coin. Work, leisure, success, failure, blue or not blue. When we judge, though, we only focus on one half of this equation. We don't see both. We see them as two separate entities when they should be together. And sometimes I often talk about perfection. And perfection can only exist with imperfection. You can't have imperfection way out on the right and perfection on the left. So they're both sides of the same whole. And as I said, the two halves are not perceived as interdependent anymore. They're not seen as being part of the same picture. And we separate these two. So if we take a look at the whole, we see that good and bad always exist because of each other. And to experience A, we have to experience not A. If everything was A, we wouldn't be able to experience it. So ultimately, we must be thankful for both bad and good, okay, because they make life and experience possible. I always say they enrich life. So we've done many sessions on emotions and how we judge these emotions as not good. You know, we don't want to feel sad. We must only chase happiness. And it doesn't give us a beautiful, broad range of experience if we only want to feel happiness. So this idea about judgments limiting our reality, reality isn't extremely complex. And if you get into quantum physics, and we spoke about Schrodinger's cat, I think, a day or two ago, judging reduces our reality by focusing only on this one aspect. So if we put something in a small box, bad, loser, failure, reality can only operate within the limits of that box. If you judge your partner as being terrible or crazy or however you judge that person cannot move out of that box because of your judgment. And everything that you see will limit it, it'll shape it, it'll create that reality. So be careful of it. And in psychology, we call this the self-fulfilling prophecy, how we create this world around us. And I'm not going to go into that now. So what is truth? Okay? Because truth changes. There was a time when a beautiful body was a rounded, full hips, the Renaissance kind of body. Then we have today's pictures that are coming out. We seem to be moving back towards this Renaissance again now. There's been a rebellion amongst people now, back towards a more rounded body with fuller hips. Then there's cultural differences in truth. We have collectivist cultures where community is important. And then the more westernized cultures where the individual is more important. So what is truth? And who defines this truth? Then judgments also create huge amounts of conflicts in our lives. Why? Because this is how I feel, and we've judged that feeling to be bad, or I shouldn't feel this way, and that's how I should feel. And this creates a big conflict. We call it cognitive dissonance, and it's this fight in our heads of trying to get away from this terrible feeling that I'm feeling. Instead of allowing that feeling to ride its course and naturally end, we try and chase it up. Or we might drink or smoke or do whatever it is, gamble to get rid of these emotions, self-medicate. So mindfulness teaches us that this is what I feel. I must become aware that that feeling is making me feel bad, but not worry too much about it, to just realize that it is going to pass. So when we start learning to become more mindful, we understand that this lens is a lens of judgment, and we become more aware of that judgment. Okay? And remember not to get angry with yourself for understanding that there is a judgment happening, but just to be able to step aside or put that judgment aside. So a mindful person becomes aware that they're judging, is aware that his judgments and reality are two different things, does not judge himself for judging. So I said to you, don't get angry with yourself for judging, just see the judgment, but be able to step out of that judgment and into the present moment so that you can interact with someone that might not be from your grouping, the in-group versus the out-group, but at least be able to entertain their thoughts. I often say, a lovely phrase I learned many years ago was called suspending disbelief, which we might as well call suspending judgment. Because if we suspend disbelief, you are able to listen to the other person and hear what they're saying without pulling down the shutters or judge them. I think it comes out of the Bible somewhere where it says we need to let the scales fall from your eyes that you can see more clearly. I think when I was a young kid, I thought those scales meant fish scales. I'm glad now I realize it's probably more the scales of judgment. And if those scales of judgment fall from your eyes, you can see a lot more clearly. Hi, Angelique. Thanks for joining. I'm glad you could check in. So be aware of this judgment and be able to step out of that judgment. So a mindful person will then be able to be conscious of the judgment, put the judgment aside, and see the reality in front of it for what it is. Like today, the wind is blowing strong. Why? Because it's probably harder than 50 k's an hour. Doesn't mean it's a terrible wind. It just means it's blowing strongly. So that's the reality. I just want to end off on one. I've got my little elastic band standing here. This is a little exercise that I sometimes share with people. And the idea is to put an elastic band on your arm. And every time you notice yourself making a judgment, just move the band onto the other arm. I'm sure it won't even take 30 minutes or 10 minutes or 5 minutes even before you get tired of moving the band from one arm to the other. And the idea is just become more aware of it. Like I said, don't get angry with yourself. And the more you become aware of your judgments, the more you're able to put them aside. So thank you for checking in. Thank you for listening. Like I said, if you like it, please share it with other people. And yeah, have a great Wednesday. Cheers.